I really appreciate it. My name's Gary. I'm a retired detective. I was assigned to the Drug Enforcement Administration. Um, I live in the Hudson Valley of New York, Warwick, actually, and I'm married. I have two kids, just got out of high school, and I'm an active skydiver now, and I have quite a story to tell you. I hope you enjoy it.
I'd love to hear that story. It's remarkable. Like, I was reading about your story and then we were talking a little about it beforehand, and it's just amazing because you got a second chance at life and not many people, get that. And through everything you've been through, you actually, you kept a positive note and you went through it all, you survived, and you actually beat the chances of survival, and you were able to get yourself back to the way you were, which was amazing because not many people, have that second chance. So, could you share with us your story? Because I think it's going to have a big impact on many people.
Sure. So my story actually began years earlier when I was a detective assigned to the Drug Enforcement Administration. I was we were on a surveillance, and I had pulled a vehicle over, and we were undercover at the time. So I was ordered to pull this vehicle over, and it's very rare that we make stops like that because we're dressed for undercover work. I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, a sleeveless t-shirt at the time. So, you know, um, I was ordered to stop the car to identify the suspect. And as he turned around on the highway, we were coming back from New York City, and he made the U-turn right before his hotel. So I turned my emergency lights on my vehicle, and I gave a little quick chirp of the siren, and his vehicle pulled over just as he entered the highway. So I pulled behind him, and I got out of my vehicle. I pulled my badge out, so he knew I was a detective. And I walked up to the vehicle. I asked him for his driver's license. I explained why I pulled him over. I told him that there was a stolen car and matched the description of his vehicle. And, I said, obviously, this car is not stolen. So I'd like to see your driver's license anyway. So he went to hand me his driver's license. And as I went to grab it, he pulled it in. So I made kind of like a rookie mistake and reached into the vehicle. And at the moment I did, he, I noticed that his foot was on the brake and the vehicle was in drive, and our eyes met. And at that moment, he hooked my arm with his left arm, and he punched the gas, and he started to head into the highway. And I'm running to keep up, right? But, I know that I can't keep up for long. Um, and I could probably yank my arm out, but then I'd fall and get run over by his back tires. So the only solution I thought was I dove into his vehicle. And now I'm kind of like on his lap with my legs hanging out, from the waist down. And I notice he's in the middle lane and he's going to the fast lane. And I know he's going to try to crush me against the divider. So, I hear this loud voice in my head, like a roar, that inner voice, but this time it's like screaming at me. And I
Yeah.
hear, shoot him now. And then I just hear bang. And next thing I know, I'm rolling down the highway and I'm just tumbling, heels over, head actually, it's like tumbling backwards. And, time slows down in things like this,
Yeah.
in your mind anyway. You become hyper focused, and so I think to myself, like, am I ever going to stop? Because it just seems like it's endless.
Yeah.
And when I come to a stop, I'm on my knees, and I still have my weapon in my hand, and I'm looking down, and I look up, and there's a tractor trailer bearing on me because I'm in the fast lane now, and you know, I again, time slows down, and I'm thinking it's almost like a cartoon, like. Is a piano going to fall out of the sky next, right? Hit
Yeah.
me in the head. And I don't even think to move because I know there's no time. But at that moment, I get yanked out of the way. and the truck goes past. My partner had shown up in his vehicle right as the suspect was taking me for like the ride, right?
Yeah.
And so he was there at the right moment, exact moment, and he yanked me out of the, out of the way, and he dragged me to the side of the road, and he heard the gunshot, but he didn't know, if I had gotten shot or anything. And he asked me if I was right, and I was like, yeah, I'm all right, just go, go get him, right?
Yeah.
So he chased him, and I got up and I'm bleeding from road rash, and I got a concussion, and
Oh, wow.
so I'm like, I'm not really aware of my surroundings, right? And I'm walking towards my vehicle, which is about 60 feet, 60 yards up the shoulder. And, you know, again, I'm not really aware of what's going on. And I'm really mad. I'm like, because I don't understand why the car is still going, right? Like, there's no way I could have missed. So, I'm walking. I don't realize that other members of our group had shown up and stopped traffic because now it's a crime scene. And, I'm close to my vehicle, and I realize, though, I look into the vehicle next to me and I see his family there, father driving, mother in the passenger seat, two kids in the back. And she just looks terrified, right? Because then I realized, my badge had gotten ripped off. So all she sees is some bald lunatic like walking up the shoulder, bleeding, with a gun, talking to himself, right? So and it snapped me right back to attention, and I holstered my weapon real quick, and I got my vehicle, and I tried to get on the pursuit, but they had gone lower level, and I went upper level of the bridge. So I never really met up with them. And when I got back to the scene, my chief was there. I handed him my weapon. He ordered my sergeant to take me and my partner both to the hospital. So, I tell the story because this is the beginning of the next part of my story, right? So I got released from the hospital. I was banged up, but they couldn't really do anything at that moment. There was nothing urgent, right?
Yeah.
But I had injuries, and so they released me, and about a week later, I couldn't even get out of bed because the adrenaline wore off, right?
Right.
So I began to have surgeries, and I ended up having 11 surgeries. So
Wow.
they, yeah, so I had they ended up replacing my shoulder. I had cages put in my lower spine. You know, operation on my wrist. So it was a total of 11 surgeries, all said and done. So after the second surgery, they retired me. They medically retired me, right? And they gave me my medals, and I understand, they couldn't keep me for that long. So I ended up getting like two of the highest medals in law enforcement, like the Legion of Honor and the Combat Cross. So I can't complain about anything with my apartment. They treated me well, but getting operated on every like 4 to 6 months, you start to become depressed. I started to lose contact with like all my friends that were still working. We were still very close, but like even when I met them out, I would start to feel like out of place.
Yeah.
Because I'm a spectator now, right? I'm not a participant.
Right.
So I stopped going. And like I said, I was getting operated on every 4 to 6 months for like, it was about 4.5 years.
Wow.
So you couldn't get anything going where like you try to get in shape or you just couldn't. And, I had this giant hole in my heart from having to retire because I loved my job. And, I just was losing myself. Well, actually, I'd say I lost myself in like this haze of like self-pity and pain pills,
Yeah.
and I would make excuses for myself. Oh, everybody looks like me because I gained a lot of weight. I put on almost 100 pounds, right?
Right.
So I was looking at pictures from my niece's high school graduation, and I saw a picture of me and my family, and I kept staring at it because I couldn't recognize myself. As hard as I tried, I could not see myself in that person standing next to my wife. And it felt like getting hit in the chest with a sledgehammer, you know?
Right.
And at that moment though, it woke me up because like this is not who I am, you know?
Yeah.
And I went on a mission like to just to get my life back, you know.
Yeah.
So over the next couple of years, I lost weight, I got back in shape, you know, I dramatically cut down on the pain medication, and
Yeah.
and I was starting to feel good about myself again. So I decided to, just to feel alive again, um, to fulfill like a lifelong dream I had of getting my skydive license. Because I had done a skydive in 1988,
Yeah.
right after I got out of Marine Corps boot camp, and I loved it, and I said to myself, "Well, I'm gonna get my license," but life happened, and I never did. So I said, "This time I'm going to do it," and I did. I got my license at the end of the 2019 jumping season
Yeah.
up north here, and so 2020 came around, and me and like two jump buddies I had, we just jumped. We went up and down the East Coast jumping. I did over 300 jumps that year,
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, we hit 11 different like skydive centers. It was kind of like it was one of the best years I ever had in my life. It was so much fun, and because I was trying to get enough jumps in to where I could qualify to become a tandem instructor,
Okay.
and yeah, and take other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you need 500 jumps and 3 years of experience. So I was just really trying to get my jumps in. So 2021 came around, and I had begun wingsuiting, and I was very new at it. I had about four jumps, wingsuit jumps at this time, and I don't know, if all your audiences know what a wingsuit is. It's like the squirrel suit, that you fly in.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys jump off of mountains, cliffs with it. But you could jump out of a plane also, and that's how most people do it.
Yeah.
So I had begun wingsuiting, and I loved it. It was really, it was,
Yeah.
the speed and everything. It just everything filled that void that I had from skydiving, right? Like
Yeah.
the camaraderie and the equipment and the training, and of course the adrenaline. It was all there, right? So I was looking at the weather, and I was sitting in my kitchen, and I saw that it was going to be like the first really nice weekend down in North Carolina. It was March. And, I said to my wife, "Hey, I think I'm going to drive down here and get some jumps in," and she was like, "Okay, just be careful." She's a
Right.
third grade teacher. And, so she was all right with it. She never really had a problem with me skydiving.
Yeah.
So I drove down here, and, I got there on a Monday, and like I was the only fun jumper there, right? And a fun
Yeah.
jumper is just it's a licensed skydiver that's not in the
Okay.
military,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or like you're an instructor or a student, just for fun.
Right.
So I knew that they weren't going to be putting a plane up for me. So I grabbed my gear, I walked into a hangar, and there was a bunch of guys there. Um, and the skydive center I was at was right outside of Fort Bragg. So I started talking to these guys, and they told me they were in the Army, and that they had chartered a plane for training.
Yeah.
And I told them I had been in the Marine Corps as a retired detective, so we hit it off, and they invited me to hitch a ride on their plane, and
Right.
of course I didn't turn it down. I was like, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I did 6 jumps with them that day, and I was mapping out my pattern where I was going to do my wingsuit stuff. it was just a great day. And so the next day I show up and, I'm in a wingsuit now this day. And, I got this feeling, right? This, I, I- you know, I would get this feeling every now and then when I was a detective. I used to call my spidey senses, right? Like
Yeah.
the hair on your neck standing up, right? And it's like, you just, something's wrong. But I can't figure out what, you
Right.
know? Um, so, I ignore it and I get my wingsuit, I put it on and it's a rental suit. And it's not the suit that I had been jumping with. I had to turn that one in because that was the beginner suit, and they had another student that needed it.
Okay.
So they gave me the next level up suit, right?
Right.
And it didn't fit. It didn't fit well. It was too tight in the arms and the shoulder, and too short. But I whatever. I got into it anyway, and I got on a plane. I got on first because I was getting out last. So we took the 15-minute ride up to altitude. It was about 14,000 feet. It's like 2.5 miles up, right? And I'm nervous the whole way up, and I'm fidgety, and because I just don't know what's wrong, but I know there's something wrong, and I start to hear that inner voice again, right? It's saying like, don't jump, ride the plane down,
Yeah.
and it's like very persistent, but again, I ignore it, right? I just push it down deep and I watch the light by the door. It turns red, and the first jumper opens the door. It turns green. He sets up in the door. He exits. So now
Yeah.
every 8 seconds, somebody's going out the door. And as they do, I'm sliding down the bench. Because I have
Right.
my wingsuit on, and I get to the edge of the bench, and that's my last chance to abort the jump. And I think
Yeah.
about it, but I don't. I don't do it. And I get up and I get to the door and I check my airspace and it's all good and out the door I go. So I immediately go into my wingsuit pattern and everything's going perfect. Except that the suit doesn't fit right. Like I said, it's too short. So I'm flying at a steeper head down angle, which means I'm
Uh,
going, super fast, and but I have it under control. So everything's still going good,
okay.
and I'm doing my pattern and, I have an altimeter in my helmet,
Yeah, yeah.
an audible. So I have it set high too. I have it set for 6,500 feet. I
Hmm.
want to have enough time to slow down, and pull my parachute.
Right.
So it starts to go off and, I reach back and I pull my parachute but I didn't take into account the increase in speed
Hmm.
from my last suit. And the second I let go of, my, pilot chute, we call it,
Yeah, yeah.
I think to myself, you didn't slow down enough. And at that moment, my canopy, it hits the wind and you hear this pow because it instantly opens. Now our canopies are designed to open slowly,
Yeah.
just for this reason, right? So
Right.
and it opens and my head snaps back and
Oh.
I hear this crunch and it's the crunch of my neck breaking. And yeah, and at that moment it's like it feels like somebody turns a switch off and there's electrical charge goes from my neck all the way down my body to my toes. And as it does, my body goes limp, and it follows
Yeah.
and then boom. And I can't move. I can move my head, and at that time I had a little movement in my left hand, and that was it. So I couldn't reach up and grab my toggles, which meant that I couldn't steer,
Yeah.
or when we land, we slow down,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I couldn't do any of that, So I said to myself, like my first thought was, no way, this didn't just happen, right? This can't be.
Yeah.
And then I thought, all right, you know what? Just give it a couple seconds. You had a jolt on your neck. The feeling of movement, it'll come back, right? So
Right.
I give it like 10, 15 seconds and it nothing, you know. And at that moment, like that moment, I knew that I was gonna die. And um and I had like the next 5 minutes to think about it, right? So, you know, now I'm high, right? I'm about a mile high. I was at 5,000 feet at this point, and you know, I'm in North Carolina, and I all I see is trees. You know, just it's like forests everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And I'm, you know, so I thought to myself, like, hey, there's nothing I can do. I just I have to accept this. That's you know, this is it. You know, so you know, they say your life flashes before your eyes, and you know, it's actually pretty accurate. You know, obviously I started thinking about my wife, my family, you know, my kids, my dogs, right? You just think of like everything, you know, and you know, I felt really tiny up there, you know, like a speck of dust almost. And
Yeah.
so, you know, like the best way to describe how I felt was like sad, right? Like a deep sadness for like everything that I was going to miss and how like the world was just going to keep turning, except that I wouldn't be here, you know?
Yeah.
And outside of my little circle of influence, right? My people that I know, nothing's going to change, right? So it's like, it's almost like as if I was never here, you know? And, you know, that's how I felt. You know, that's a horrible feeling. You know, it's very humbling. It's a very humbling feeling. You know,
Yeah.
so you know, but that all happens like fast, right? And then that little fire, I call it the fire of your soul. It ignites, and it's like a little tiny birthday candle flame almost, right? In the beginning, you know, and like sadness turns to anger, you know, and then as it grows, anger turns like the fury. And I said to myself, you know, I'm gonna die, but I'm gonna die fighting. I'm gonna go out fighting like a warrior with my sword in my hand, right? That's what I
Yeah.
thought. And so I thought, okay, well, what can I do? You know, there has to be something that I can do. Um, so you know, a couple, you know, my brain started working. You know, um, I had planned my opening in a spot where I knew that the wind would be out my back, right?
Yeah.
And that was for in case I threw my parachute out and you know if it was tangled up in the lines or something and I had to cut it away and go to my reserve parachute that the winds would float my parachute back towards the airport, you know, the
Right.
skydive center. This way I wouldn't lose it because they're about 3 grand, you know, you don't want to lose
Yeah.
it. So so I knew that the winds would push me towards like the drop zone there. And but the only thing is, if I did nothing else, I would be too high and I would just float right past it.
Yeah.
So I had to burn off the altitude. And, you know, I remembered that I had recently, you know, maybe 50 jumps earlier, had learned how to steer my parachute using my body weight.
Oh,
Right.
really?
So I could move my head, right? And I had that little movement. So I was able to make these wide 360-degree turns, right? And
Oh, wow.
you know, and it seemed to be working, right? It seemed to be, you know. Now, obviously, I wasn't like trying for any like accuracy, like landing awards or anything, you know,
Yeah.
because again, I didn't think I was going to live, so I wanted to get close to the airport so they could find my body, and you know, because I had that terrible fear of, you know, floating off into the woods, you know, and the trees and getting hung up in a tree, you know, alive and like that, nobody being able to find me. And then like the birds, the squirrels getting into my suit and like eating me alive. Right. And, you know, the only consolation I really had was knowing I wouldn't feel it, you know, but that's, I mean, that's not really that comforting, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but, you know, so I had to get close. And the other thing though too, like I had that voice going in my head again, and this time I called it like the bad voice, right? and I don't want people to misunderstand me. I don't hear voices, right? But it's that inner voice, that you're
Yep.
whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And but this one was saying like, you know, ditch it into the trees, get it over with. Because even if you live, you're still paralyzed, and that's not living, and that's
Yeah.
not fair to your wife and family to have to take care of you the rest of your life, because you wanted to go skydiving, right? So all these thoughts going through my head, and but it wasn't a bad idea under my situation. But I figured, the crash landing is going to kill me anyway. So why rush it?
Right.
And like the reason why I thought that I wouldn't survive was so my canopy flies. Well, first of all, like what happened was the equivalent of me hanging myself like a mile high in the sky, right? Yeah, I probably shouldn't even survive that. But
Yeah.
and now my canopy flies like between like 27 and 30 miles an hour. And
Right.
if you put like a 5 and 10 mile an hour wind at your back, I was going to hit the ground between 30 and 40 miles per hour with a broken neck. I just didn't think there would be no way to survive that.
Yeah.
So, so I kind of resigned that, hey, I'm not going to make it, but I
Yeah.
just still got to get close to the airport.
Right.
So I'm doing my turns and everything, and it's working. I'm trying to stay disciplined, and not let my mind just go off into these.
Yeah.
So, my altimeter was also set for a landing pattern. Um, because we land like planes, same way, we have a landing pattern. And so mine was set for 1,200, 600, and 300 feet. So, I'm doing my thing, and then, I hear, beep, beep, beep. And I'm like, man, I'm all right. I'm at 1,200 feet. I'm crossing the runway. So I'm already going to overshoot the landing zone. And I'm heading like straight for the trees. And, you know, but I still say, what, I maybe at least they'll find me. They have to see me. And then beep, beep, 600 feet. And so now the ground's getting bigger now. It's really noticeably getting bigger because
Yeah.
it's coming. I can't stop it.
Right.
And I joke now and I say like, the hardest thing in skydiving is the ground, because it's the truth. Um, so I'm doing my thing but all of a sudden like I get hit with a wind and it changes my course of direction and probably about a 120-degree turn
Right.
and I could actually see where I'm going to land. Approximately it's in somebody's backyard directly across the street from the skydive center.
Yeah.
So, um, which is pretty good because I'm actually going to land into the wind.
Right.
So then that beat 300 feet, and I know like I'm dead in 30 seconds. And I think and say in my mind, I say, Jesus, please save me, right?
Yeah.
And with that, um, I hit the chain link fence that was in this backyard of this house. And I
Wow.
couldn't lift my legs up to avoid it. So I hit it right below my knees and it flips me over and I smack into the ground. And so I had this really dark tinted visor at this time. And so my face is like half in the ground. And, I don't, I hear nothing but silence, right? And I don't see anything. It's just dark. And I actually like think to myself, am I dead? Right? Because I don't know. I actually don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I try to move and I can't move. So I'm like, oh man, I'm alive and I'm in big trouble now, because I really, I didn't think I was going to live. And honestly, I didn't really want to be honest. Because, thinking about living as a quadriplegic, I just didn't think I could do it, like
Oh
that's,
yeah.
yeah, I can't even like contemplate what that would be like.
Right.
So, so now I just, I'm just, there now, and
Yeah.
I think to myself, you know what? you must have like broken bones or internal bleeding or something, you know? So I said, all right, I'll sit here and, you know, lay there and just take some deep breaths and see what happens, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, the guys on the ground that I had jumped with the day before, the military guys, they had got out of the plane first and landed quickly.
Yeah.
And they knew exactly where I was supposed to be because I had done it with them the day before, you know, like 6 times. So they looked up and they saw, you know, I wasn't where I was supposed to be. So I got binoculars and saw that my arms were dangling and they knew I was in trouble. So they jumped in a truck and, you know, they actually followed me as I was coming
Yeah.
in. So within a minute, they were there and they were all over me, you know. They got me stabilized and, you know, I was going in and out of consciousness. They got me across the street to where the medevac helicopter was.
Yeah.
And so next thing I know, I'm getting prepped to get on this helicopter. And, you know, I said to the flight paramedic, you know, I was joking at the time, but kind of not really. You know,
Yeah.
I said, hey, when we get to altitude, can you throw me out, you know? And he got mad. You know, he's like, no, not, you know, not on my watch, you know.
Yeah.
But I you know, you have to look at it from my point of view. It was like,
Oh, I get it.
I kind of thought like I felt like a sack of meat, right? Like I had no hope, you know,
Yeah.
like I was finished, right? Like done, you know.
Yeah.
And so they put me in a helicopter and we ended up you know, they told me they were taking me to a further hospital
Right.
that, you know, it was a trauma center. So we landed and as I'm getting pulled off the helicopter, I could see like there's got to be 20 doctors and nurses and technicians. They're all lined up. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, I wonder what happened. Like something really bad must have happened, right? Like maybe a big
Yeah.
accident on a highway or something. Why were so many, you know?
Yeah.
And so as you know, they all of a sudden, next thing you know, they're all over me, you know,
Right. Right.
I, and I still it was chaotic. They were cutting everything off, putting IVs in me, you know, and so there
Yeah.
was an intake nurse, and you know, I asked her, I said, hey, you know, did something happen, you know?
Yeah.
And she looked at me, she smiled, and she's like, you happened, you know? So you know, but at that moment though, like I realized that like they really cared, you know, and you know, like I was in good hands, right? But I couldn't figure out why. I was almost like, you know, what's the point? You know what I'm saying? Like it's
Yeah.
like, why bother? You know? So they must have X-rayed me like 4 or 5 times. They had that portable X-ray machine, and they couldn't like understand how I didn't have any scratches on me or any broken bones or anything, you know, except for my neck. I had
Yeah.
broken my
Yeah.
neck, and you know, so they put me into ICU, and you know, so I'm there, um, and I got to tell you, like I was really calm up to that point, you know, because my mind was occupied, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know what they gave me, but I know that had I not been heavily medicated at the time that I was, I don't know if I'd be able to keep it together as well, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Um, you know, because hospitals, you know, even the best ones, they can be like pretty terrifying, you know,
Oh,
especially at
100%.
night, you know, and especially like I can't even move, right? And you know, I was in North Carolina. Um, my kids were still in high school, so it's like my wife was again, she was a teacher, so she couldn't just hop on a plane and come down and take care of me. So I was going to be alone. You know, I was going down this road alone, and you know, I'm laying there in the ICU, and I can't see a way out. You know, like there's no, I don't see a happy ending here, right? And you know, your mind can launch you into like greatness, right? But it can also drag you down like to the lowest pit of hell, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where mine was going. And, you know, I had to get out. I had to find a way out. And, you know, I'm not really embarrassed to talk about it, you know, because it might help somebody, right? So,
100%.
you know, so I'm thinking like I got to kill myself. I got to find a way to kill myself. So this is going to sound ridiculous, but again, when you're laying there and your mind does crazy things. I remember the movie The Silence of the Lambs, and there's a part in that movie where the bad guy Hannibal Lecter convinced the lunatic in the cell next to him to swallow his tongue and
Yeah.
choke himself, right? So I said to myself, well, I can move my tongue, I'd say I'm gonna swallow my tongue. So I sat there for like a half hour trying to swallow my tongue, right? And it didn't work, I must not have been doing it right, or it's probably impossible to do. I have no idea, but it didn't work. And so again, my mind, I make this plan that all right, when I get out, I'll get a motorized wheelchair and I'll drive in front of a bus, right? Again, because like if you let your mind go, it's going to go.
Oh yeah.
So the doctor walks in and he explains to me like, okay, look, you broke your neck. I don't know if you severed your spinal cord. I can't tell from the X-rays. He said, so I'm sending you for an MRI, and you're going right into surgery. Okay, great. So next thing I know, I wake up right back where I was, and that heavy feeling of like dread and doom. It's like suffocating. It's like this heavy blanket on top of you,
Yeah.
and you almost can't breathe.
Right.
And the doctor walks in and he explains that okay, everything that he did, was a success, and I didn't sever my spinal cord. Okay, he said that my discs, 5 and 6, they like blew out, like they crumbled from the I guess the impact, right? So and because of that, they didn't sever my spinal cord. But he told me that had I not gotten there, 2 more hours, I would have been paralyzed from the neck down.
Wow.
So, you know, but he told me though, he said, I can't tell you what your recovery is going to be like. He said, because I tell my patients that it's all luck at this point. Some
Yeah.
people will walk, some people won't. I don't know why, you know. He said though, but if you stay positive, and work hard, it's up to you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's up to me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, man, I don't know if I got it in me at this point.
Yeah.
Um, so the plan was they were going to keep me in ICU for, till the swelling in my neck went down and they
Right.
could, see better at what's going on in there.
Yeah.
And so I was there, 4 or 5 days, and whenever I was awake, I just tried to move something. I would go from my toes to my head, just trying to
Yeah.
move something. And on the fourth day, I thought that I was moving my big toe on my right leg. And so I called the nurse in and I said, look, I think I'm moving my big toe. And she says, I don't see it, but she rips off my sock and she grabs my toe. And she all excited. She yells, oh, I feel it. And she runs off and gets the doctor, right? So the doctor comes and he grabs it and he just smiles from like ear to ear, right? But he doesn't say anything, and he just walks away. And so, okay. But the next 2 days, I get my other foot, big toe, and then I get a finger on my right hand and a finger on my left. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, this is pretty good now. I got, all 4 furthest points in my body. I could move a little bit, tiny bit. And so with that, he comes back and now he commits. He's a little more, he's like, all right, look, everything I did it's working. You gotta stay positive. He says, you gotta work hard. Just stay positive. So, okay. And with this, I get to therapy, right? And
Yeah.
they were just amazing people, right? Like, it's like they like taught me like how to live again, really, right? And they taught me though the biggest thing was that the only thing holding me back was my mind. It was me. The only thing holding me back was me, right?
Right.
And so I started to think about everything and how everything that happened bad was countered by something that happened good, you know?
Right.
And it was like a giant puzzle. And everything was a piece to that puzzle. And if one of those pieces was missing or didn't fit right, then I would either be dead or paralyzed, right?
Yeah.
So, and then I thought to myself, now, if I truly believed, right, that God had saved me, um, well, then I had to believe that He wouldn't abandon me now when things were going to be at their most challenging, right? So,
Right.
you know, so I put it all together in my mind. Even I went as far back as like, when I had gotten into the shooting, right, and my partner there at the exact moment, right, like it's just a lot of coincidences, and I just it gave me a little spark of hope,
Yeah.
and I thought like, man, people have done great things with just a little bit of hope. And from that moment on, I was positive. Like it was like, you know, I was walking out of that hospital. You couldn't tell me anything different. And, the times where like a doctor or a physician's assistant would come in and they would say something like, well, don't get your hopes up. Or I would, you know what? I would throw them out. Let's get out. I, I don't want to hear nothing like that. You're either
Yeah.
on my team or we're going for the win here. We're not going for, a tie,
Yeah.
so, and, I just had just so much hope though, right? That I was going to make it. I was going to walk out of that hospital,
Yeah.
and, so in therapy though, like, you see people like there were a lot of people that were spinal cord injuries because that's what this hospital specializes in,
Yeah.
and some of them were way way worse than me, and others were pretty similar. But you would see like one day like there was something different about them, right? And what it was is that they had given up. They just gave up, and it was very frustrating because there's nothing you could say to them, right?
Yeah.
Like I wanted to kind of like shake them, but
Yeah.
number one, I couldn't move, and number two, but it was sad because they were stuck. They didn't advance anymore,
Yeah.
and you know, like with me, like everything was going really excellent, right? And but I remember coming back from therapy one day, and it was lunchtime, so they brought me back to my room, and I still couldn't like manipulate my phone or anything. So I asked if they could call my wife, and because it was lunchtime, and we always talked at lunchtime because this is during COVID too, though. So she was teaching from home through
Right.
Zoom, and so they dialed, and she got on the phone, and I could tell in her voice that there was something wrong, and I asked her, like, I pushed her a little bit on it, but she didn't want to tell me because she knew I had enough to worry about. But she had dismissed her class for lunch, and one of my dogs had walked in and died, just dropped dead, you know?
Oh my God.
And it hit me so hard, right? I had to get off the phone with her because it just destroyed me because, here I am in this hospital, in a body that I destroyed, right? So I'm trapped there. And I kind of feel like I feel responsible in a way because all the stress that I'm putting on, like all my family members, and I'm sure the dog felt that the dog was 13 years old. It was a golden retriever, and it just wiped me out, And so I just sat there in my chair, staring at the wall, and like your mind's going, and again, because like I'm human, right? Like yeah, I'm positive, but man, at that moment, you
Yeah.
know, I lost it, and I'm sitting there thinking, like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. I'm gonna tell my wife to put me in a nursing home, and just close the door and make believe I'm dead. But I started to think about everything, and I used to be a drill instructor in the police academy. You know, in the mornings I'd go there.
Yeah.
And my job was to bring the police recruits, kind of like to this point where I am, like to just, you know, my job was to teach them to like dig down deep inside themselves, right?
Yeah.
And ignite that fire,
Yeah.
and to never give up, right? To
Right.
find the will to fight, right? That was my
Yeah.
job. So I thought about that, and it reminded me who I was, okay? And I decided that, you know what? No way, no way. I'm going to go back to therapy, and I'm going to tell them I want more pain, I want more suffering, and because the quicker I take it, the pain and the suffering, I can go home, but I can go home on my feet, not in that wheelchair.
Right.
So, that's exactly what I did, right? And they were more than happy to give it to me. They loved it. They loved it. They were great at their job. And they loved me as a patient too, though, because I was very motivated.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I I kind of snapped back into that positivity, and I pulled myself out of that pit that I was
Yeah.
going. And so like after 2 months of absolute hell, because they put me through hell, and I actually I love them for it, because it was great. I managed to walk out of the hospital, right? And it wasn't pretty. I had a lot of work to do. This was just the beginning of my journey.
Right.
Um, but I was on my feet, and that was important.
Yeah.
So I got home, and I just realized that the world is a lot bigger and faster than that hospital room.
Yeah.
So like I said, I had a lot of work to do, and I was improving every single day. And I found a place for therapy, and they were really great. And I just kept going to therapy, and every day I did a little better. Like I had no feeling in my hands, and my whole body was still numb, right? But I still had that nerve pain.
Yeah.
And so if I had something in my hand and I looked away, I dropped it. I dropped so many glasses in my house. Like I couldn't even pick a screw up off the ground. It was too much for my fingers.
Yeah.
So, but just kept working and working and working. And I started to get enough improvement where, you know, eh, everybody thinks it's a crazy idea at this time, but not me. You know, I decided to go back to the skydiving center by my house, and I wanted to, maybe work on seeing if I could jump, because I was about to lose my skydiving license, because if you don't jump every 6 months, you lose your license. You have to jump at least once in 6 months. So, the thing is, though, I wasn't trying to be a hero, and I wasn't trying to like get attention, say, "Hey, look at me, I'm jumping." It had nothing to do with that. What it was about was that I knew that I was going to have, well, first of all, though, I didn't want it to be defined by my injuries, right?
Yeah.
My accident. I didn't want just to be that guy. Oh, he got into a skydive accident. That's why he limps, and that's why I didn't want that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I wanted to finish what I started, right?
Right.
But the second thing was, though, like I knew that I would have these limitations, right? That I would have, whether my limp or my hands, whatever it was.
Right.
And but I was okay with that. It was if I could do something, though, that I love to do, right? Like
Hmm.
skydive. I'm trained to do it. If
Right.
I can do it safely, why can't I do it, right? Because you know, um, for example, right? So if I'm laying in bed, right, and I wake up in the morning, right, and everything hurts, right, and very easily you can say, "Oh, you know what? I'm just going to lay in bed today because it's no good today. I'm going to stay in bed," and nobody would fault me for it.
Yeah.
But if I could skydive, there's no way that I could sit there and say that to myself, because hey, you know
Right.
what? You can skydive, right? So you get out of bed. Don't be a victim, right? Just go do whatever you're going to do,
Yeah.
um, and stop feeling sorry for yourself and go do it. So that was kind of like my point, and nobody would help me. I couldn't, they laughed at me. They were like, no way. I
Hmm.
asked them, they take me up on a tandem, right? And so they were like, no, you're crazy. It's not going to happen, because like I had that stigma of the broken neck, right? And I
Yeah.
understand it. I totally understand it. Um, but it's not reality, like it's an injury
Right.
like any other injury, right?
Yeah.
So, again, I was starting to get depressed. I was losing that control of my mind, and thank God for my wife because like there's some really, really bad nights, where, I feel like the walls are closing in on me.
Yeah.
And so and also like I watched like veterans jump, right? And, some of these guys are missing arms or legs and they're jumping out of planes. So I like, why can't I do that? Like I couldn't get anybody to even discuss it. So I called my friend up who was she was the manager, the drop zone manager of Skydive Shenandoah in Virginia. And she's a good friend of mine. She was also a state trooper and a Marine, and she was a rigger, right? So like, a rigger fixes your gear, your parachute, all
Yeah.
that stuff. And she was really prominent in the sport of skydiving. So I called her up and, I kind of like went off, not on her, but in general that, you know, had a little fit of feeling sorry for myself.
Yeah.
And and I was like, no one will help me, and I haven't even seen my gear, and blah 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 blah. And she told me, she said, look, I have your gear. I have it. Your wife gave it to me. And we're not keeping it from you. I just need more time to fix it. I'm like, okay. So she says, look, if you get a doctor's note and you come down to Virginia, I'll take you on a jump. And that's all I needed to hear. And I was like, okay, great. I got on the phone as quick as I could. And I called my doctor and they were all for it. They're like, yeah, absolutely.
Oh
But
yeah.
they knew that there's nothing I could do that would hurt what they did. Uh, so, why not? If I could do it safely, go for it. That was their attitude. But the doctors up here, though, they were different. They were like, "What are you crazy? No way! You're gonna get paralyzed. You're not doing it." Always negative, always. So I just ignored them, and so I had my note like within an hour, and you know, so I was supposed to meet her 4 weeks later, and I didn't tell anyone, except for my wife, because like I was worried that somebody would get involved and stop it from happening.
Yeah.
So like 4 weeks go by and it's like my big day, and I go down here and I'm nervous that she's gonna, he's not gonna go through with it, right? And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
somebody got to her, right? uh, but she was on board, right? And she gave me she read me the riot act. She said like, if you do anything unsafe or if I don't think you're ready, I'm gonna ground you for 6 months. Then we'll try again. But I don't want to hear anything about it. I said, well, no problem, because I knew she'd be fair, right? No agenda, like just that's all I asked for. Just give me a shot.
Yeah.
And so I put my gear on. I needed help because I couldn't even like put the straps through the horn, the buckles or anything.
Yeah.
So I had help, and I climbed onto the plane, right? And I'm laughing at myself because I can't even tie my shoes. I have elastic shoelaces on my shoes, right?
Oh wow. That's
You
crazy.
know, but but the thing is though, like I knew that I could skydive because I did this jump probably 1,000 times in my mind, laying in that hospital. I
Mhm.
went over every single part of it. So you know, we got to altitude, right? And I had never been down in Virginia, and it was beautiful, right in between the mountains, right? The two mountain ranges. And so Shauna, her name's Shauna Finley, she she gave me the thumbs up and she opened the door. And so I hung my legs out and I'm sitting at the edge of the plane. I'm like 2 miles in the air now. And I'm looking down and I'm smiling now ear to ear, right? And, I feel like my dog, like when they stick their head out of the window, right?
Yeah.
So, and I just give her the thumbs up and I just lean forward and fall out of the plane. And the wind hits me and I do like a barrel roll and a flip, and I stabilize myself and I'm in a pretty good position, right? And like I turn right, turn left, whatever, and I don't see Shauna. I'm like, I, I can't, I don't know where she could be, right? But she's above me, watching me, seeing how I do and everything. And then she finally comes down and we link up, right? And she's smiling ear to ear, and she's like so happy. And so I give her the signal that I'm getting ready to deploy my parachute. So she flies around to my side because she's like a flying ninja though, like amazing, right? Like so she's at my side because in case I go to pull my parachute and if I like can't with my hands, she's right there. She can pull it for me.
Right.
So I pull the parachute and my canopy goes up and I got line twists, right? And I'm like, oh man, but it's not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. But the problem is that my shoulders are locked up, so I can't really reach up that high. So I reach up as high as I can, and I have to kick my way out of it. And then, I pop out. I got this perfect parachute above me, and it's so quiet. And I pull my leg strap harness down, and it allows you to sit in your harness like a chair. And
Okay.
so now I'm at 4,000 feet. Everything's perfect, so everything's working. And I just sit there and I start to think about, like just everything, like how lucky, or blessed I am that I can walk, and now I'm skydiving, right? It's like, that's a big deal at this moment for me, like
Oh
it's
yeah.
just, and I just think of all the people that helped me and all, and like, yeah, how far I've just come, and how far I have to go still. But just this point of this is why I wanted to skydive though, because I knew it would be so motivating and satisfying,
Yeah.
because then I realized though, like, 5 months and 12 days earlier, I was laying in that backyard in North Carolina, wishing I were dead, right? So, and it all comes around, and words can't describe though, like, just how um, appreciative I am and grateful and just, like just, yeah, just, I mean, I actually yelled at the top of my lungs, like I'm alive, because like I am. And I'm more alive at that moment than I've ever been my entire life, you know?
Wow. Yeah.
So Shauna quickly lands and I take my time and I land, and she's crying, right? Because she's so happy, and I'm just so like I just can't believe what happened.
Yeah.
My hand's shaking, my hand never shakes. It was shaking, right? And I did a couple more jumps that day, and you know, it's amazing that, what we can do when we have no choice,
Yeah.
right? When we have no choice, we can do incredible things, and if you have the right people around you,
Yeah.
and if you're not afraid to ask for help, right?
Mhm.
You just can do amazing things, and I've always known, because I always preached it at the academy as the drill instructor. You can't give up. You got to fight, and but you know, having to do it right, and it just I have everything in my life has changed. Everything, you know, the way I think about everything is just different, right? Everything is like a magical gift for me,
Right.
um, the little things, right? Because we take for granted all the little things,
Oh.
and I tell my friends like, try just one day or a couple hours in one day, or even an hour, just
Yeah.
and every single thing that you do in that hour or 2 hours, however long you want to do it. Just think about not being able to do it, you know?
Yeah.
And because when I was in the hospital, the things I daydreamed about were those little things, like putting my sock on or brushing my teeth, like things that, I had to rely on everybody else to do,
Yeah.
and we don't realize it, I remember in the hospital, I was starting to become institutionalized, right? Where I was starting to forget the things that I love,
Yeah.
and so this nurse came in and she asked me if I wanted a cup of coffee. And I was like, coffee? Really? I can have coffee? Because you forget you're a human being almost, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, of course, you can have coffee. I'll make you a cup. So I had to drink it through a straw, but I didn't care, man. I felt normal for that moment, right?
Yeah.
And those little things are so important, And I just learned so much, though. Like, you know, when I was up there floating around, trying to figure out where I was going to crash, land, and most likely die, right?
Yeah.
I never one time like thought, oh man, I'm going to miss my car. Or I wish I had more time to buy a bigger house or get a nicer watch, right?
Right.
Never, right? Like, so, and like those things, like I realize now, like those things it's just stuff. It really has no like value, long-term value, right?
Yeah.
So like I want to build like wealth and equity in my soul, right? And like it's that hard, I'm going to
Right.
do it by just being good to people, just being good to people.
Yeah.
Everybody, though, even people that don't deserve it, you
Right.
know. And that, better still, because it's like I'm getting more points for that.
Yeah.
So, like it's just I don't know how to explain it, but that like I don't know where I came up with like why everything changed for me, like the way I think. It's like I lost a lot in this accident. Like I don't want to sound like I'm whining, but I have a pretty good limp, and my hands get weird. Depends on how my nervous system is.
Yeah.
But I gained more things than I lost.
Right.
Um, and a lot of people can't understand that. It's just the way I look at things and just that positivity just goes so far. And it's like, I realize that like we can't change our past, right?
Right.
But the past though can really change our future.
A
You
hundred
know,
percent.
we can let it drag us down like an anchor, or we can use it as like a compass and have it guide us, right?
Yes.
But it's up to us, right? We get to decide that, and
100%.
I learned that it's just a choice every day. Like when I get out of bed, I choose I'm going to be in a good mood today. I'm going to be nice to everybody, and of course I'm human, and
Of course.
sometimes I catch myself, but I bring myself right back,
Mm-hmm.
and it's it's so simple. I don't understand. I wish I would have known this so much, younger, right?
Yeah.
And it's like the only way we lose really like is if we quit, right? And
100%.
I the thing with me though is like we don't know the end of our story, right?
Right.
We don't get to know the ending, right? So we can't give up, right? We got to keep fighting. I said we got to fight till the lights go out,
Yeah.
because I
100%.
look at my story and I say like, well, what if I would have ditched it into the trees, right?
Yeah.
And got it over with, or been able to swallow my tongue.
Right.
You know, what a waste. What a waste. I mean, this happened like 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And all that time I would have missed so much,
Yeah.
because we don't know the end.
No, we don't.
And and that's the biggest takeaway, that I got from this whole accident. It's just to stay positive and not to give up, just to keep fighting. And that would be my message to people, really, like no matter what your situation is,
Yeah.
just fight, push through,
100%.
because you'll be rewarded. I believe that, it's again, and
I
of course I
definitely,
had help, right? From up above, right? And you know, so backup is available, right? I say that too, like, backup's available. We just got to believe,
oh,
and
100%.
so, you know, that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm still jumping. I've done 108 jumps
Oh, wow.
since my accident,
Yeah.
and I'm done for the season, but I'll go again next year. I'm a little slower, I'm not as strong, but I don't care. It doesn't matter, like
No.
and to me, like skydiving gets to represent like the miracle that like God gave me.
Yeah.
So it's almost like every time I get on that plane, it's almost like I'm wearing a billboard,
Yeah.
for God, right? It's because I'm not a preacher, I'm not a pastor, right? And I can't be throwing Bible quotes at people. It's just not who I am.
Yeah.
But it's almost like this is my way of just showing people, you know, you can achieve like really, really significant things,
I
with a
believe,
little help and a little hard work,
oh,
you know.
100%. I believe
Yeah.
everything happens for a reason in life. I think, it's not that things just happen. I think there's a reason for everything. I definitely do. Now, with your book, not my time, what motivated you to write the book? Because you could have just had this experience and not share it with anybody. What was your motivation to really want to write that book and get it out there to everybody?
So every doctor that I encountered told me, "Oh, you should write a book. You should write a book." And I was always like, "I'm not a writer, like that's not my thing." And so I always had to tell the story over and over again, and I always, told the story, but I would say, I got really lucky. I would tell people I got lucky, and every time I did, I felt guilty, because I knew I didn't get lucky. I didn't
Yeah.
get lucky. I had help, it was deliberate. And, you know, some people laugh at me, and I don't really care because I was
Yeah.
there,
Right.
like,
Exactly.
um, so I was telling a story one time in the instructor tent over at the skydive center around my house. And I told the person that asked, I started out saying, "Yeah, I got really lucky." And there was an instructor in the tent that, I've known for some time. And he yelled across the tent, he's like, "You didn't get lucky, you're blessed." And that kind of hit me hard. And because, here I am, I'm self censoring myself, by not saying the truth. Hey, you know what? God came in and he helped me, man. Without him, I'd be dead right now. There's 100%, no doubt. You
Yeah.
know, that's what I should have been saying the whole time, right?
Right.
So I thought to myself, you know what? If he could have enough courage, you know, and not care what somebody says to him, so could I. And
Exactly.
so I wrote the book, and I just put the truth in there,
Yeah.
that there's no way, too many coincidences to it just so I but I'm not a statistician, I can't even say it. But you know what I'm talking about. Like, so I can't tell you, but it's got to be statistically impossible for all those things to go right.
Mm-hmm.
And plus I know what I felt. I know, that.
Yeah.
And
100%.
so yeah, I definitely believe that I had help,
Oh,
100%.
you 100% did. Definitely. There's no doubt in
And,
my mind. Where can
and
people
then,
find your book?
um, right now the best place is Amazon. I'm selling it on my website, but by the time you do all the shipping, because it's right from the publisher, right now, like Amazon, it's probably cheaper. And I just want to say, like, there's a quote though that I saw the first day of therapy from boxer Jack Dempsey, and it
Yeah.
says that a champion is someone who gets up when they can't, you
Yeah.
know. And I just love that quote, and I always think about it when I'm trying to do something, and I feel sorry for myself,
Yeah.
whatever. And it's I don't know. That's just I really believe though, and I wrote a poem for a presentation I gave, and
Yeah.
if you don't mind, if I can read it
I would love
real quick.
you to read it. Yeah,
All right.
definitely.
Okay. So it's called "Beauty from the Ashes," and so from the ashes will come glory. Inspiration and healing are in my story. The raging fire has ignited my soul. Is not salvation our goal? The end is not known. I have peace. My path is set in stone. For courage and honor is what I strive. Fear not this day, the king is alive. The only way out is to win. Throw the stone if you have no sin. The stone will not be thrown. Praise be to God, all our sins are known. In judgment they sit. Let them be. I will not quit. They slander me with every breath, unaware that I will fight to the death. Forgive them, for they refuse to see. On the other side, bloodied I will be. Slowly they decay and won't stop lying. I will be victorious or die trying. God made this day, and in it I will rejoice. To have faith and belief is my choice. When he returns, no man knows the day or hour. God is the source of my strength and power.
Oh, I love
That's
that.
it.
I love
So,
that. I love that.
um,
This,
it's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'll go finish. What were you going to say?
Um, I was inspired to write that. Just it kind of sums up a lot of what I went through. I threw in there, and
Yeah.
because like people will judge you, and everyone has an opinion, and they don't really think about what they're even saying,
Yeah,
you know.
100%.
And if you dare to get out of your box, like I was 53 when I got hurt, so at that age, I'm supposed to be in a certain box, right?
Hmm.
I'm not supposed to be skydiving, right? I'm not supposed to be doing anything like that.
Right.
So everybody wants you to stay in that box because if you dare to get out, then they have to look at themselves and
Yeah,
they might not like what they see.
exactly.
So, but I won't stay in the box, I'm not
Yeah.
being put in a box, you know. So
Well, good for
that's
you.
really, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been an amazing story, and I thank you so much for coming on the show to share it. I think you're going to be helping a lot of people just with your testimonial, and your story is just truly amazing. And you definitely, you give a lot of encouragement and hope to others. If you could survive, anyone can survive what they're going through.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to tell the story. And hopefully, anyone who's about to quit, like just keep going, just keep fighting until the lights go out. That's all, you know.
100%. Now, where can people
Uh,
find your website?
um, so it's gpacelli.com. So it's GPACELLI.com. And if anyone wants to contact me, just go to the contact section and reach out. I'd love to talk to you. And so it's a work in progress too. So it'll always be changing. So,
I love it. Thank you so much. This has been amazing, Gary. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
thank you for having me.
Oh, you're
It was
welcome.
great. Thanks.
You're welcome. You have a great day.
You too.